there's always something we can do to reduce pain. It's never a lost cause. And sometimes the people who are the worst off have the best results because their body is just starving for doing the right things.
Well, when it comes to aging, folks, the general school of thought is that pain and deterioration are just part of the deal. Most people lament the inevitable decline of their faculties while resigning themselves to a life of infirmity and incontinence. But what if it doesn't have to be this way? What if there's a way to mitigate or even reverse this decline? What if there's a way to feel younger and stronger as the years tick along? Well, fortunately, our expert today, Eileen Kopsaftis, can clear up common misconceptions around aging and show us why there's actually nothing natural about physical deterioration. Eileen is a physical therapist, founder of Have Lifelong Wellbeing, author of the book Pain Culprits: Surprising Truths Behind Pain, How to Uncover the Cause and What to Do About It. And for over 2 decades, she's been helping people resolve pain and experience lasting well-being. Super awesome to have her with us today to discuss what it means to age well and dramatically improve the quality of your life. So welcome to Switch4Good, Eileen.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here and humbled that you asked me. So very excited to get information out there that needs to be known. Yes.
Yes. Well, I turned 50 a couple of weeks ago, and there's things about my body that just don't react, let's call it, the same as they used to. And after years of abusing my body from a drug addiction and an eating disorder, but then regenerating it all the way to an Olympic athlete, that part of my life too, as over exercise is certainly a style of abusing your body, because it's way over the hill of what really, just natural, nice, steady, circulation and movement should be. So I'm especially excited to really understand the core of what you do. And so what I want to do is kind of zoom out, and then we're going to focus back in real specific for folks. We have a lot of questions with specificity. And you even have some techniques that you're going to show us, which you're excited about for those that are watching on YouTube. So we're going to do that towards the end. Yes. But just from a real general aspect, and apologize that some of these first questions generalize, but I want to get people sort of set in the right mind space, right, to hear you help them. Mm-hmm. How should we approach pain, right? So let's say we have an injured shoulder or something as simple as a headache. How should we be thinking about resolving that pain instead of reaching for the Advil, let's say? Mm.
It's so interesting you say that. There's no coincidences, right? The reason I'm excited about your question is because my goal is to teach people why relief from pain is not the same as resolution from pain. Mm. And so very often we reach for something to get relief, right? We'll take a pain medication, or we'll grab a hot pack or a cold pack. And I'm actually putting some videos out on my YouTube channel now where I'm talking about these different things people use to relieve symptoms, but it doesn't resolve the cause of the problem. So, yes, we want relief. I'm certainly not saying that's a bad thing, because nobody wants to be in pain. There's a reason pain is a 4-letter word, right? But the point is we want to figure out what's causing it. And I kind of joke, I was talking with a good friend of mine's dad a few weeks back, and he was asking me about some pain that he had. And I was trying to get him to understand that he wanted to go after the cause, because he wanted to go see an orthopedist and get an injection. And I'm not putting down a whole profession or any of that stuff. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But I was trying to get him to understand that the cause of his pain could be addressed. And I sort of joked a little bit. I said, if I was hitting you on the back of the head with a hammer, would you want to take an aspirin, or would you want to stop the hammer? Yeah. I mean, it just kind of makes sense that way. And then when it comes to the human body, what we've done, if you've ever read T. Colin Campbell's book, Whole, right? WHOLE, he talks about reductionism in nutrition. And we do the same thing in the healthcare world, in the medical world. We break a person up into parts, and we no longer see a whole body with all these systems that are interconnected and synergistic. We see a shoulder come through the door or a knee come through the door. And so when you do that to a body part, you completely negate the whole being, and you eliminate the possibility or the prospect of resolving the cause. Because most of the time, the cause is not where the symptoms are experienced.
Right.
Yeah, that's what makes it complicated, doesn't it? So a lot of people think that, well, I'm just getting older, so it's normal. So I just have to live with it. And what do you say to that? Are pain and aging, do they go hand in hand? Or is it more the things that we've done in our life, like Dotsie mentioned, that attribute to pain, not our age?
So it's not even necessarily age and things we've done, because I work with a lot of people who are younger, 30s, 40s, 20s, who have chronic pain or issues that aren't resolving. And it's what I think has happened is we all have things happen in our world, right? And so that whole thing, you are getting older, or what do you expect at your age? Or we're supposed to just fall apart at some magic age, and the pharmaceutical industry's job is to hold us together before we go below ground. I mean, those are all lies from the pit of hell. It's not true, right? The human body is designed in a way to regenerate, to repair, to restore. When you're doing the right things, when you're feeding it properly, when you're hydrating it properly, and when you're training it properly, you can, be running marathons in your 90s and not be in agony 24 hours a day. So it's really all about knowing the right things to do. And the best part is, because the body is so reparative in its inherent nature, it doesn't matter what's going on in your world. You can always make things better. Even if, I always wish I get a hold of people before surgeries, right? But I see a lot of people after surgeries. And even if they've had, like 2 failed back fusions, which is an ICD-10 code, by the way, because back surgeries fail so often to resolve pain. It's scary. And they come in and they've had all this surgical alteration in their body, and they might even have an implant and something going on. And there's always something we can do to reduce pain. So it's never a lost cause. And sometimes the people who are the worst off have the best results, because their body is just starving for doing the right things.
And they're in so much pain that even like the slightest mitigation of it feels like a miracle.
Yes. Yes. Even just a breathing technique can make a difference.
Yeah. So I'm hearing you say definitely that somebody needs to get to the root of the pain. They need to resolve it, like you said, instead of popping a pill or just putting a Band-Aid on, sticking an injection in, because it always comes back, especially with the injections. I know that from personal experience. I had debilitating back pain almost the last probably 5 years of my cycling career. It had nothing to do with my back. It was my hips. So I really definitely learned how connected everything is. My back was completely fine. A couple people wanted to do back surgery, and my back was fine. So our body is wildly complex, and you're a master at understanding it and all of its complexities and how everything connects. But the general person, as I was the general person, still am, but I learned quite a bit more through that journey. What are steps 1, 2, 3? Maybe your shoulder's killing you, and maybe it's really your mid back that the problem is. But what are the first things that you can do to start to understand and learn the connections? Because the first thing we do is we go to a doctor, right? We go to a chiro, we go to an ortho, and we ask the questions. And a lot of times they're, allopathic and want to give us drugs or do surgery.
Yes. And I always say, in their defense, people can only teach what they know. They can't teach what they don't know.
Right.
Right. So, even PTs are radically different between each other. I mean, you could have one PT who specializes in wheelchair fittings and another PT who specializes in low back, and they're certified in McKenzie. So, you know, which PT are you going to go to depending on your problems? And a lot of PTs are very skilled in manual work, and some PTs are really, and I say this with respect, kind of ignorant about human movement, and they don't understand the connection because they haven't been taught that. Unfortunately, at least last when I looked, the curriculum for PT college courses doesn't really include understanding authentic human movement and how everything's connected, and why you need to look at the hip and the ankle if the knee has a problem, why you need to look at the thoracic spine and the hips and the ankles if the shoulder has a problem. So there's certain, what I call pain culprits. Like there's three main areas that tend to be the biggest cause. So, you know, you say the human body's really complex, you know, and I've become this master. Well, it's just because, you know, I'm going to hit 65. So I've had a lot of time to do this. But the biggest point is, if people understand that there's three main areas that tend to be the problem, no matter where they're experiencing their pain, that's a pretty basic concept to grasp, right? And so if you think about it, most people have had something go on with their ankles. Have they ever had an ankle sprain? Have they ever had some kind of surgery where they were non-weight bearing for a while on one side of the body? So that foot, ankle, calf complex is probably not functioning properly. So doing some really good training to improve those areas, right? Those two ankles, or, you know, both typically, you wouldn't just train one, would be a really good idea. Make sure it's got good motion, make sure it's stable. And then the biggest thing to understand is we move in three planes of motion, yet most people only train in one plane. So in other words, they're just moving forward and back when they work a certain body part, or they're just going sideways, but they're not training in all three planes. And they're trying to isolate body parts. So that really promotes more injury. All the itises, right? Bursitis, tendonitis, rotator cuff issues. Most of the people you see who have those issues are people who do spend 3, 4, 5 days a week in the gym. And it's because they're doing everything not authentic. They're isolating things. They're using machines that doesn't allow their whole body to be part of the team. And the whole body wants to get in there, right? It's kind of like you wouldn't send one guy out on the basketball court, right? You got to have 5. So you need everything working together. And so
let me just jump in. So you say one of the planes is straight forward and back, sort of, right? And the other ones are what? Yeah. So
there's
one of
forward and back, and then there's sideways, which is frontal, and there's rotating, which is transverse, right? And I love the Gray Institute because they are the most profound educational source on the planet that really understands all of this and teaches it in all glorious detail. And Gary Gray is the founder of the Gray Institute, and his nickname is the father of function. And whenever he looks at a body part, and I always joke and say, I'm not all that brilliant. I'm just really gifted at finding brilliant people and learning what they know.
Yeah.
And, you know, Gary will tell you, he'll go, okay, is that functional? Would anybody ever do that movement in real life? And you think about how the muscles are performing in real life. And yeah, why are we getting on a machine and pushing against resistance to straighten our knees when we're sitting, when we would never do that in real life, ever? Yeah. So it creates this massive shear force to the knee.
The functionality aspect is something we really want to bring forward, and or I especially do, because that was exactly where I learned that it was my hips and not my back. As a cyclist, going back to what you're talking about, you know, the planes of the body, there's nothing in cycling that is bilateral, right? Like you're not moving back and forth, you're just moving up, you know, straight forward, up and down. And so I had way overdeveloped hamstrings, glutes, and quads, and almost no development in my hips. So developing that part of my hips, because I wasn't going to stop developing those other muscles, right? Like that was my job. So I had to then almost overdevelop the sides of my hips so that my back would stop slipping out of alignment. And so that was functional for what I needed to do for the goal at hand.
Right.
But generally speaking, we want to stay, in shape and fit and out of pain. And everyone's bodies are structured a little bit differently. I mean, very similarly, right? Because it's the human body, but structured a little bit differently. So let's take an example. Let's say you have somebody that just has really bad back pain. For people that are listening that are like, okay, I'm hearing everything that you're saying here is an umbrella, but like, let's get specific. Because a lot of people have back pain, so I think that's a good one. And they come and they talk to you about it. What are the top 3 or 4 things that usually the back pain stems from? Because that will help people. And then what are some of those first thoughts and ideas and exercises that you take them through to, kind of unlock and figure out why?
Yes. So, and I understand we want this to be practical, right? We want this information here to help people and not just fill their head with knowledge and they don't know what to do or where to go, right?
Right.
So practically speaking, if someone has back pain, it's almost never their back.
Right.
Even if things show up on imaging, because there is really no correlation between what shows up on imaging and the symptoms people experience. There's been study after study after study after study that shows just as many people have a bulging disc and no pain as there are those who do have pain. Now, I'm not saying the disc would never cause pain, but the majority of the time, it's not what shows up on imaging that's actually causing the problem. So I can kind of joke a little bit and say you sort of want to ignore the low back to fix the low back, because it's almost never the low back. The low back is really, really good at bending forward and backward. It really likes sagittal plane. That's where its strength lies. That's what it's meant to do, bend forward and back. It has very little motion spinal-wise with rotation or side bending. Now, I don't know if you remember years ago that we were told don't twist when you exercise because you'll injure your back. That's because all the physiologists got together and go, oh, the vertebrae in the lumbar spine don't really rotate. So that's why people are hurting themselves. Let's stop doing that. But we need rotation. We are rotatory beings, right? So if you watch a little kid get up off a floor, they rotate. So here's what we do. We need that rotation, but we need it above the low back in the trunk, and we need it below the low back in the hips. So typically when somebody has low back pain, there's several causes that are common. One of them is all of the sitting that we do, especially since, the world shut down and everybody's living on Zoom now, right? That's why I'm standing right now. I don't want to sit anymore. So the goal is you want to get that when you sit on a muscle, it atrophies, it weakens, it shrinks, it loses power. And the gluteus maximus or max is the largest, most strongest muscle in the body. And so a lot of people they got no max. They're, you can almost say it's a pancake butt, especially if they've been sitting for decades. Maybe they drive a cab or a bus or a truck, or they've been in an office all day and they go home and they're sitting on the sofa all night because they got pain and they can't do anything. And so they've lost that power source. And no matter what you do with movement, that power source is responsible for providing the kind of the push-off. It's another physics thing. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So for instance, if I go to push open a really heavy door and I struggle to do that, it's not because I have weak arms. It's because my power source isn't strong enough to push into the floor in order to get the door open with my arms. So we need that power source. And a lot of people have been sitting on it for decades. So typically, now I do a very thorough assessment with people when I work with them. I do a 3-plane assessment. I have them go through 12 motions and I figure out what rocks of the body aren't working. Is it the trunk? Or is it the hips? Is it the ankles? And then we start wherever the biggest impairment is observed. But typically, one of the most important things people can do, especially if they've been sitting a long time, is to do squats. But a lot of people say, I can't do squats because they hurt. So, or their knees don't like the squats. So I like to teach what I call a chair squat, which means you have the chair behind you and you even hold on at the kitchen sink so that you don't have to worry about going so low that you can't come back up to standing. Your brain gets nervous if you do things that it thinks you can't do. And so it will cheat. And so you don't want your brain to get nervous. So if you're holding on and you're safe, your brain will say, oh, okay, we won't get hurt. We can do this. And so it'll allow you to use those muscles you want to use. Depending on how weak they've gotten, you might only be able to do like a half squat. But when you do it repetitively and you do it without pain, you do it successfully and competently and confidently, you build on that success and the strength can come. I had a guy 86 years old who had decided to stop walking to the store and he got weak. He just declined. His wife brought him into PT. In 2 weeks, he was leg pressing 200 pounds. So it's the body can do it safely without pain. You just have to start where you are. So squats are great. And I always tell people that if you have a chair behind you and you keep your knees against the chair and your bottom goes back and down, it's not that doing squats with the knees going forward are horrible. It's just that that's going to work the quads more. When the knees go forward, you're going to feel it more in the quads. We're trying to build max. So if you keep the knees back and your bottom goes back and aims toward the seat, kind of like a seat-seeking missile, that's what I tell people, then that's going to build max. So that's a huge thing with people who have back pain. Another thing is, again, as I said, the motion above and below the low back. Most people don't understand the trunk. You can kind of, and Gary Gray actually coined this, the silent saboteur. So many people, especially as they get older, have no clue that their trunk has lost motion. And so, they struggle to back up their car. And, their neck might hurt or their back might hurt when they turn.
So not strength, but motion. So you literally mean like I'm turning all the way to the right, like this, backing up my car.
Correct.
Like it can't do that. The motion
Correct.
is gone. Oh,
yes.
Okay.
The ability to rotate, the ability to turn
Wow.
has diminished over time. And people don't realize it, right? Because they've just kind of, their brain doesn't tell them, you know what, we can't turn as far as we used to turn 10 years ago. So we've been compensating all these 10 years, but I haven't told you. The brain keeps it a secret, right? So, I actually did a video on my YouTube channel on, did your brain know where you are? Because people don't realize just how much the brain hides from them and they've lost things. So you can know right away if you've lost any trunk mobility, which is huge, just by rotating as far as you can to the right and rotating as far as you can to the left. If you have any pain when you rotate, especially in the low back or the neck or the shoulders, it's probably your trunk. It might be your hips, but it's probably your trunk. And it's the same thing with extension, right? As we get older, people tend to come forward and sort of lean forward and they're afraid they're going to fall backward. They lose the strength in the front of their body. And if they stand up tall, they're going to fall back because nothing's going to control them and keep them from falling. So you lose that extension, that ability for that trunk to go up and back. And the worst is the upper section of the trunk, like T1 through T4 or so. And that extension there is required for full motion of the shoulder. So a lot of the times when people go to point straight up at the ceiling with their arm, they'll say, oh yeah, I've got full motion. And they lift their arm up, but their arm is about 8 inches from their ear to the side of their ear. If they can bring their arm up straight next to their ear without tilting their head, because the brain will cheat, then we know they've got good extension in the top of the trunk. But if that arm doesn't go, we know that that trunk has lost extension. And you can stretch the shoulder all you want, but until you get that thoracic spine moving again, it's going to impact shoulder function. So you want to make sure that that trunk moves well, rotates well in both directions. And then, of course, the hips. You want to make sure the hips, your hip is the second most mobile joint in the body. The first is the shoulder. And, unless you're in the circus, your hip doesn't quite do what your shoulder does, but it's close. And the goal of that is to provide all of the movement that we do in real life, squatting and running and jumping and all the fun stuff we do, right? If you're in athletics or gardening, golfing, golf, it's all about the hip. people don't realize. It's like, I've improved people's golf scores and I've never done anything but played mini golf, but I know how to restore rotation. So it's those hips have to be moving in all three planes. They need to have really good motion forward and back, out to the side, away from the body, in across the body, and they need to rotate really well. Now, the most important thing to remember is you don't want to just lay on a table and stretch your hips to move in all those motions, because everything changes when the foot hits the ground. The hips are weight-bearing joints, right? The shoulders aren't weight-bearing joints unless you're doing push-ups or planks or whatever.
True.
And so those hips have to be fully mobile when you're on your feet. So training them and my website, I have a free video where I teach people how to assess their three-plane function. And I walk them through doing those 6 movements, and they can figure out what's going on and where they're lacking or impaired.
Wow, this is so fascinating. As someone who's had a lower back problem for 30 years and basically manages it through stretching. And I do get pain-free, but only for a limited amount of time. And I'm hearing from you. So if I could just recap. So it means a low back pain could mean either weak gluteus maximus muscles. So we need to do things like squats. It could mean a lack of mobility in the back higher up. So we need to move not just forward and back. And then it also, same with the hips, lack of mobility. And we need to do the exercises, not on the floor like I do, because I do a lot of hip openers on the floor, but standing, because that's how the hips work. That's the functional exercise of the hips.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes. Absolutely. Okay. If you do exercises laying on the floor, you might be strong enough to lift a car, but when you go to get something out of the trunk, you could blow out your back because your body doesn't know how to function on your feet.
Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want. And what is transitional back pain? You talk about this, and how do we resolve that?
So transitional means moving from one position to another. So say you get pain when you go to stand up out of a chair, or you get pain rolling over in bed, right? Or, sitting down into your car. We're going from one position to another. So that would matter on what movement is it that's painful. So if it's painful going from sitting to standing, now it could be weak max. Because of that physics thing, your feet have to push through the floor, not through the floor, but push into the floor with the same amount of force as the weight of your body in order to come up to standing, right? People don't just sit and then float up into standing. You're pushing into the floor. It's a physics thing, that equal and opposite reaction. So that push requires max. Max has to be working, right? So that might just be a simple weakness thing. It could be the bending forward part. The low back muscles might not be eccentrically loading, which is that getting longer under tension to control that forward bend. So again, you want to try to get those muscles back to fully functioning. And there's lots of ways to do that. The goal is not to do a motion that causes pain until it stops causing pain, because that doesn't work, right? You have to find a way to retrain the muscle to do that movement without pain. And so there's lots of ways to sort of, I don't want to say trick the body, but sort of cozy up to the bear without punching him in the nose and doing some work. And then the body says, oh, okay, that's better. Yeah, that's what I'm trained to do. And then you can start increasing the intensity of the training.
So what I'm hearing too is that like functional strength is very different than like brute force strength, or even the look of strength. I remember the fabulous Nimai Delgado telling me, I train to look strong. I'm not actually that strong, because he is a competitive bodybuilder. And I just was like, what? Wait a minute. His biceps, right? Like he literally has named them. One of them's chickpea and one of them is orange or something, because they're so, but that's a really good example, I think, of what you're saying about functionality and functional strength, and the exercises that maybe people that are a bit older need to do, at the chair. I do some work with some older folks for agility and balance at an old people's home. And in 3 weeks, a couple of them were able to do single leg squats, but the first one was holding onto the chair, right? It's like amazing how quickly your body will adapt to go, oh, wow, you're going to make me do this every day. Okay, I'm going to adapt, because I don't, you know what I mean? I don't want it to be so painful, and I want to be able to do it.
Yes.
And one of them, which I can take no credit for because I'm just learning it from you now, said, my back stopped hurting. I'm like, oh, bonus. And now I know why. From you.
Yes. And it's funny that you say that. I've done a lot of different settings throughout my career, and I've been in nursing home settings and home care and all of that. I've had people over 100 years old in the parallel bars doing squats.
Yeah.
So your body physiologically doesn't stop how it's designed to function. Muscles get stronger when you work them properly. Bones get denser when you're doing weight-bearing work and you're not eating a diet that leaches the calcium out of your bones like dairy, but we won't get off on that tangent. You guys already know that.
We will.
So Eileen, what can you give us an overview of, because when you were talking about just the sagittal plane, I was thinking of my workout at the gym this morning, which was only on the sagittal plane for all the body parts pretty much. And then I walked there, which is also just forward movement. And then I got on a stationary bike. I mean, I was just
walking is very much a 3-plane functional activity. Walking uses all 3 planes.
Oh, okay. So I did something right. But can you give us an overall recommendation for how someone should look at their fitness routine over the period of maybe a week, just general, what they should be including, and then maybe some other habits that you have? Because I know you look at pain very holistically. It's not only about the muscles and the nerves, it's also about water.
So and maybe like what they should be asking themselves for people that are listening, like, okay, I'm going to focus this next week on what Eileen's saying. What should I be asking myself and then doing, like Alexandra said?
Yes. So you want to be doing movements that are really whole body movements that allow as many joints as possible to be part of the party, because your muscles are switched on by something called a proprioceptor. And that proprioceptor is what sort of determines what's happening, like how much the muscle is going to tense, and some of them switch on by speed. Some of them switch on by how much mobility you're doing, how much movement you're doing. And so you want to get a lot of joints involved, and you want to think of it as being really functional. And then another really important thing is you want to think of it like you're loading to unload. And I'll explain that. If you, and you don't even need to see me on video to know this. I am doing the motion as I talk about it though, but everybody knows what it looks like when somebody swings a bat to hit a baseball, right? So when they go to hit a baseball, they're not, unless they want to bunt, they're not just standing there with a bat like this in front of them and just hit the ball lightly. They take the bat and they swing it up behind them, and they're rotating their trunk, they're rotating their hips, their ankles are loading, and they're really loading those muscles eccentrically to get ready to release the power that they just loaded to hit the baseball, to swing the bat forward. So when you're doing exercises, if you can sort of think about the fact that you're loading something to unload it. So for instance, it's not just about picking up a weight and shortening a body part. It's what am I doing? So if you go to do a squat, when you squat down, you're loading max. You're loading your hamstrings. You are loading your quads a bit. You're also loading your calves. If you do a squat properly, you're working your whole body pretty much, except for your neck maybe and your shoulders, unless you're holding a weight. So it's a beautiful whole body workout. And the cool thing about doing a squat is, and this is how you can kind of get the other planes involved, unless you're doing a maximum, squat with a real heavy weight, you can have your feet be in all kinds of different positions. And this kind of blows people away because they think, oh, I should have my feet be side by side and my toes are pointed forward and they're hip width apart and everything is just right and just perfect. But when you go to grab something out from under the kitchen sink and you're in the middle of cooking a meal and you got to grab something, your feet aren't perfectly pointed forward, hip width apart, side by side, squatting down with this perfect performance. You might have one foot back, one foot forward, you're rotated, you've got this wide, and you're grabbing that heavy thing out from under the sink. So you want to train your body in a way where it's kind of prepared for doing things that aren't perfect. And that really does reduce your risk of injury. So when you go to do the squat, you can have your feet be, like that hip width apart, but you can also have your feet be wide. You can have them be narrow. You can have your toes turned in just a little bit. I'm not talking, all the way in, like complete pigeon-toed. Or you can have the toes turned out, and I'm not talking completely out like doing a ballet plie, but you just change the angle of the feet. You could have one foot turned out, the other foot turned in. You can have one foot forward a little bit. There's 27 different foot positions just playing with those alone, but it's an infinite number depending on what you do. So, and it's the same thing with push-ups. You can do the same thing with your hands, and you can do 27 different positions with your hands. Doing planks. Planks you don't have to just do a plank and have your body stay still for counting up to your 2 minutes or whatever your goal is. You can do 3-plane movement in a plank position by being on your hands and feet and having your pelvis be the driver, and your pelvis goes down and up. So there's your forward motion, and your pelvis can go side to side. There's your frontal plane. Your pelvis can rotate. There's your transverse plane. You could have your feet move. You could have a knee come up towards your hand. That's sagittal. You could have a foot go out to the side. That's frontal. You could have a foot rotate over the other foot. That's transverse. So you can actually train planks in 3-plane motion and function. So if you're thinking, okay, I want to get my body moving in 3 planes, how does that work? How does that look? Obviously, learning more, understanding more would be helpful so that you don't hurt yourself. Just knowing information doesn't really help. Practicing it and applying it really matters. And one of the reasons my book doesn't have pictures of exercises in it, and I actually had some people review me and kind of slam me for that, people can't learn an exercise from a picture. It doesn't work. So that's why I created that free membership on my website, where I teach the 3-plane functional movements. I teach people how to assess themselves in 3 planes, and I give a workout with a beautiful introduction to 3-plane training, and teach them how to do 3 planes of training for their calves, for their hips, for their trunk. So you just want to stop focusing on body parts and focus on movements that are authentic.
I mentioned we were going to get specific. And one is incontinence.
Oh, yes.
To happen in the female side of my family, let's say. And I just like, oh, great. My sister who's had 3 kids, she's like, after the 3rd one, I don't know, I just pee sometimes. It's like, and she's younger than I am. So tell us about how to strengthen the pelvis and the pelvic floor, if that's indeed what would need to happen to help prevent and mitigate and reverse incontinence if it's possible.
Yes. So there's a lot of the reason that that people have unwanted leakage. Now, there are some issues like nerve damage, strokes, injuries. That's a whole other story. But if it's the most common reason, which is weakness in supporting a heavy bladder, the bladder can hold up to 2 cups of urine. So it gets pretty heavy. and you have you have two sphincters. You have internal and external. The internal sphincter is what tells you you have to go to the bathroom. The external sphincter is what you control and keep closed until you get to the bathroom. Now, if the muscle that supports the weight of that bladder is not strong enough to support the weight, the bladder kind of drops down. And when it drops down, it pulls open the sphincter. And that's why you get unwanted linkage. You can squeeze and do Kegel till the cows come home, but that leakage is going to happen because of that bladder dropping down. So the biggest part of the muscles of that area that supports that is called the levator ani muscle. And the levator ani muscle is connected fascially, and a lot of people know what fascia is. They've heard of myofascial release and all of that. Fascia is this connective tissue that surrounds all your muscles, your blood vessels. It goes right down to a cellular level, and it's very highly innervated, and it really impacts body function. And so you've got this fascial connection between the levator ani that supports the bladder and your obturator internus, which is a hip rotator muscle. So when you are doing really good workouts on your feet, training your hips in rotation, it strengthens the body's ability to support a heavy bladder. And I actually have a course that I offer on my website, but there's also this beautiful device, and I don't make the device, I don't sell the device, but it was developed by somebody who's a graduate of the fellowship program of the Gray Institute. Her name is Christina Christie, and she's been doing this work for her whole career. And she developed this device that works really well. It's real easy to attach to your legs. And it provides beautiful resistance rotating in and rotating out. So you do all these movements in standing, and you strengthen those hip muscles, which strengthens the muscles that support the bladder, and no more leakage. And I've been teaching this for years, and people are thrilled. I mean, I had one guy, I'll never forget it. He said, I could drink a cup of coffee and go for a run and not worry. And that's huge,
hard to do,
right?
And so this is on your website too, like the video, because I think I know what you're saying, but I want to see it.
Yes.
When you say hip muscles, is that different from pelvic floor muscles? Because we've always, or is that the Kegels? Is it the Kegels that do the pelvic floor?
Arnold Kegel was a doctor who brought a lot of attention to a much needed topic that needed to be discussed, because it was a thing nobody was talking about. It's very embarrassing. Nobody was mentioning it, right? And you didn't have aisles of disposable underwear in the markets and the stores at that time, right? So he brought a lot of attention to something. So we're really thankful to him. However, Kegel exercises are really more about kind of squeezing and contracting your bathroom muscles, right? Number one and number two, and holding them and strengthening them. The problem is, the sphincter that's responsible to keep the leakage from happening is not a muscle that you can get stronger by concentrating on it and thinking about it. The levator ani muscle that supports the bladder is not a muscle that you can get stronger by thinking about it or isometric contraction. So, I mean, if that was the case, nobody'd ever have to go to a gym, because every muscle on their body would be perfectly fit and strong, and because all you had to do is think about it. So you need to train it, right? And the best way to train it is, a lot of people don't realize this, but most people who become, well, pretty much all people who become wheelchair bound end up incontinent, because those muscles weaken. They're not on their feet. No weight bearing is happening. People who are bed bound become incontinent, right? Those people don't maintain continence because those muscles have shut down. A lot of people who have a hip replacement, there's two reasons they could have some continence issues. It could be before the hip replacement, because they have so much pain, they're just not walking, they're not rotating, they've lost rotation in their hips. And so those muscles weaken that support the bladder, and now they leak. Or they have the hip replacement, and for whatever reasons, they don't rehab properly after the surgery. This is when they used to do a posterior access and cut through the glutes. They don't do that hardly anymore. Now it's an anterior access, which the recovery time is light years improved. But they would not rehab properly after the surgery, and they would end up having incontinence after the surgery. So hip function is 90% of staying continent. And it's, you got to train on your feet. You've got to be working those hip muscles, rotating in, rotating out, squatting, doing all kinds of great movements. And it works. It works.
That is exciting. I'm gonna go.
And that's another one of those myths. That's another one of those lies from the pit of hell that says that, you know, you can't go below ground until you've needed disposable underwear. That is not true.
Right.
Right. Tell us more about myths. You mentioned before the show began arthritis, that there's a lot of misconceptions
Yes.
around arthritis. I wasn't clear if it was rheumatoid or osteoarthritis. So tell us, it's not a necessity that we have to have arthritis as we get older.
Right. Right. A lot of people think, well, I inherited it, you know, it was passed down. What gets passed down is our diet and our recipes. That's what gets passed down. It's not a genetic disease, right? Arthritis. There's osteoarthritis, which is inflammation of the joints. There is rheumatoid arthritis, right? There's psoriatic arthritis. There's different types. Those tend to be more autoimmune. You could argue that osteoarthritis is an autoimmune as well, because the joint is kind of damaging itself. But the Stanford University School of Medicine did a study to determine what causes joint damage. And they determined that it was chronic inflammation. It's not wear and tear. It's not old age. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a patient come in, you know, they had their right knee replaced. Oh yeah, arthritis. You know, I said, well, how's your left knee? Oh, my left knee's fine. You know, and then they would go on about something about how, you know, at their age and they've been standing and their job. And I'm like, well, did you hop around on one leg? And they'd look at me like, why is the other knee okay? I mean, if it's old age and wear and tear, shouldn't they both be worn out? Kind of makes sense to me. I did a really deep dive into this. I created a course. It didn't get published, but it was meant to go on a specific website for a movie that came out. And I don't want to name any names because I don't know that I have the rights to say that, but it was a really good, it was like Forks Over Knives kind of a movie where everybody knew about it. It was really well done. And anyhow, I did a deep dive for 8 months into the research behind obesity and pain. And there was a huge correlation with chronic inflammation and pain. And oh my gosh, I could paper the walls of my entire house with how many studies I looked at that had to do with food and chronic inflammation. So most of the foods that I tell everybody, there's no neutral food. It's either positive or negative. And then I have people who try to trick me. Oh, water's neutral. I'm like, no, it's not. It's positive because almost everybody's dehydrated. So it's a positive thing, right? So that said, there are foods that we eat that promote chronic inflammation in the body. And there's a lot of data that backs this up, right? Animal foods, huge in promoting chronic inflammation. They have something called arachidonic acid that your body can make from plant foods, and it only makes what it needs. But in animal foods, you're getting a direct supply. And it's kind of like putting a brick on the gas pedal of your immune response that keeps inflammation going in the body. So the joints just they're inflamed. They start to break down. It's
because the animals' bodies are making that acid from the horrible diet that we're feeding them on a mass scale, right? That's why they have so much in the flesh of animal foods.
Well, I'm not sure if they promote that in our body because of what they eat. I haven't seen that link, but I haven't looked for it either. So that could be a big part of it. I do know that I have a dear friend who is an animal naturopath who says that the way we're feeding our animals is why they're dying and having all the diseases human beings have, and why they're dying young. That we really need to be living a life like an animal is supposed to live, and they live healthy and long and happy, right? So there's a lot to be said for that. But it's the overload of the arachidonic acid that's leading to the chronic inflammation. And then there's also excess weight. If someone's carrying excess weight, the fat cells in the body are like little chemical producing factory, and they produce this inflammatory cytokine production that promotes chronic inflammation in the body. So it's like a double whammy. You know, I mean, if you knew that what you put in your mouth made a difference in how you feel and how you move. You know, right now I'm doing a Nourish Away pain class. It's a 4-week class for the local community college. And I had a guy email me. It was after the second class. He emailed me to say that his joint pain is almost gone since he eliminated the dairy.
We love to
2
hear
weeks.
that. Are you saying arthritis is primarily about the inflammation in our bodies, or wholly about the inflammation in our bodies, and that
Pretty much.
inflammation is caused by our diet?
Diet, and well, if excess weight is also caused by our diet too, right?
Right.
So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
that's so good to hear, because that will empower people. Now,
Yes.
when we talk about inflammation, a lot of times when, you know, a joint's inflamed or something, the doctor will say ice or heat, or where do you come down on that? That's definitely a appeasing and not really finding out the source. But do you recommend that we use
Yeah.
ice and
So,
heat?
I mean, there's different reasons a joint would be red and inflamed. I mean, if there's an infection, we need to deal with the infection, right? That's serious, especially if they're post-surgical. I mean, I've had some post-surgical people who had some redness and this isn't looking too good. I think you might want to go get this checked out, because, you know, infection, it can be very dangerous, especially osteomyelitis, that kind of thing. But if usually a joint, if it's red and inflamed, it's because it's been injured. Now, it's a completely different thing if it's because of a disease process, right? So if somebody has a red inflamed joint because of arthritis, that's different than if somebody just sprained something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then the RICE, you know, rest, ice, compression, elevation, that was some, I can't remember his name now. He wrote a book back in the 70s promoting RICE. And he's since recanted, and it's been debunked. It actually slows down the repair process. Like if somebody has sprained their ankle, you actually want to get them moving the ankle and a little bit of weight bearing as quickly as possible versus elevating and resting and icing and compress. That delays the healing process. It slows it down, and it takes a lot longer to recover. So there's some stuff out there that's still people haven't caught up with. Oh yeah, that's not necessarily the best thing to do anymore. So
Just
it
because
makes
it
it hard to
feels
know what to
better,
do.
it might not be better. I had
Right. And ice or
Yeah.
heat, you know, you have your pain nerve cells are called nociceptors, and you've got different types. You've got C, you've got A delta, you got the silent nociceptors, which only happen like if something really extreme happens, like you get a nail through your foot. But the slow fibers, the C fibers, respond really well to thermal changes. So heat, ice. So now those C fibers are kind of telling your brain, oh, that feels good. I feel better now. But nothing has changed as far as the injury or the problem, right? It's just that pain nerve cell is now reporting differently. Mm-hmm. The C fibers also respond to mechanical pressure. So that's how a massage can feel good. But it didn't necessarily change the mechanics of the joint or whatever, or how the muscles are functioning, but it makes you feel a little bit better. They also respond to pH changes, which is why taking an anti-inflammatory can have some effect. So you're kind of, you know, if you put, I won't say any names. If you put a cream that's supposed to, you know, that smells when you get in the elevator and everybody knows you've put that on you. I don't want to say any names and get anybody in trouble, but you all know what I'm saying, right? That is a counter irritant. And all it does is irritate the cells to report to the brain, so that the brain is not hearing the pain message, it's hearing the irritation message.
Are you talking about Ben Gay?
Yeah. I'll let you say it. I didn't want to get anybody in trouble.
I mean, you're just telling the truth. That's all. So
right.
We want to hear that for sure.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting because there's so much ice involved. Ice baths. I've probably taken literally 1,000 of them. And, you know, after about 2 minutes and 15 seconds, because I've timed it, you know, everything stops hurting, right? It's frozen.
Yes. Yeah,
but
it's frozen. It's numb.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And you're craving that, right? I had a coach that was like, get out of the ice because you're impeding your cellular growth, right? Because I wasn't only looking for quick repair, I was looking for quick growth of the muscular system, right? To be a bit stronger and more endurance and better and reach higher. And he's like, you're impeding that growth. So you might as well just, stop training so hard if you're going to, it was tough because it feels so good. And the ice is, it's even at the Olympics, they had these huge tubs of ice and you could guess the sport based on what body part was in the ice. There's the swimmers, right? They've got their shoulders in the ice, and there's the gymnasts. They're just up to here in ice because everything hurts, right? The cyclists and the runners are up to the waist. Like it's hard to fight back against what your brain is telling you. Relief, relaxation,
and that's the nociceptors telling you because they've gotten happy from that.
I didn't know what
stimulation.
they were called until now, but it's that's a good point. You spoke about hydration, and I was really surprised to learn that hydration is related to pain mitigation. So how important is it? I mean, we know it's important for health because we've had lots of experts on, talking about hydration for that. But for you, like how is it related to pain, to chronic pain, to all the pain that we've been talking about today on the show?
Right. So the average person is, in our world, the average person who's not real health conscious is dehydrated. I mean, there's been studies. The massive percentage of the population is dehydrated. They're drinking all these caffeinated products, which inhibits your antidiuretic hormone, which means it tricks your body into losing fluid, right? So caffeine does that, alcohol does that. And a lot of people, all those energy drinks that have become so popular, oh my goodness, talk about dehydrating people, right? So, and then coffee and tea and anything that's loaded with caffeine. So if we're dehydrated, nothing really functions well in the body. And it's interesting how the body will work to try to get you to do something. And sometimes it will trigger pain pathways because you're so dehydrated, the body's trying to get your attention to get you to drink some water. And it figures, okay, if we get some pain here, maybe they'll drink a glass of water, right? It's the same thing with headaches. A lot of people have headaches because they're dehydrated. Muscles are about 78% water. So if you want hypertrophy, you want to be well hydrated. Also, muscles perform, one of the tasks that muscles do that a lot of people are completely unaware of is that they provide body heat. So we all know of that relative who's, has no muscle to them whatsoever. They're skin and bones, and they're constantly cold. Well, they have no muscle to produce heat, and they're dehydrated. So that's why they're cold all the time, right? So you really, you need to be hydrated. It helps for joint lubrication. I mean, it helps for digestion. It helps to metabolize fats. Sometimes people can lose weight just by increasing their water intake because they're dehydrated and their body can't metabolize fats. So it does so many things. But when it comes to pain, it really has to do with the fact that the muscles are just crying out for fluid. And since everything we do involves muscle function, unless we're going to lay in a bed and be spoon-fed, the muscles really need their water.
Tell us what that means, though, to be properly hydrated, because sometimes it doesn't mean having to pee all the time, right? How do you know if you're properly hydrated? And what do you need to get into you to be that way?
Yeah. So there's, a lot of experts. It's so interesting because just a couple of weeks ago, I was doing some recent research on this because I was trying to figure out where it came from that we're supposed to be drinking 8 glasses of water a day, right? That magic number of 64 ounces. And then, if you want to fine tune it, it's, well, if you take your body weight in pounds and you divide that in half, that's the number of ounces. So if you weigh 100 pounds, you need 50 ounces of water a day. And then, of course, if it's hot and you're sweating or you're drinking caffeinated or alcoholic beverages, you want to increase your intake there. There's also the whole, if somebody is excess weight, for every excess 25 pounds of weight, ideally they're recommended to consume an added 8 ounces of water. So if somebody, is 50 pounds overweight, you want to add 16 ounces to the 64 ounces, right? Or say they're 200 pounds. Now we're looking at 100
It's a lot of
ounces of
water.
water.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of water, right? So and there is that whole thing with having to go to the bathroom, right? And I tease people, especially if they don't like to drink water. I tell them, well, it's kind of how it works: water in, water out. Because what it's doing is it's kind of, to just say it bluntly without going into all the science, it's kind of flushing out the cells, right? So it's kind of like, you flush your toilet, you don't let things sit in there. You want to get rid of it and you get fresh water in there. Well, it's kind of what your body is sort of doing, right? So you want to be hydrating regularly. If you're thirsty, then you're dehydrated, because we don't necessarily want to count on our thirst mechanism, because sometimes we're so used to not drinking water that our thirst mechanism doesn't work. And then we think we're hungry. It becomes like a hunger mechanism, but you're actually thirsty. You're not hungry. Your body's confused. I had a dear friend in her 80s who, well, she's still my dear friend. She's in her 90s now. But back when she was in her 80s, she would never drink water. And she had this raspberry patch out in the back, and she would go out in the heat. And I got nervous she was going to have a stroke. I mean, she's not drinking any water. I know she doesn't drink water. And she says, well, I'm never thirsty. And I said, because your thirst mechanism isn't working anymore. So she loved me. She decided to appease me and start drinking water. Well, I stopped by about 3 days later and she started yelling at me. I think if she'd had a cane, she would have hit me. She goes, what did you do to me? I'm thirsty all the time now. I said, good, your thirst mechanism is awake, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different, I couldn't really find exactly where that came from with the scientific study of why we need the 64 ounces. I couldn't find that, and I researched for a while. I found lots of very well-known, very public, very high-profile experts in the nutrition fields, and they all kind of parroted it, but nobody gave the reference. So I'm going to be completely honest and blunt. I'm not sure. I can't show the data. I need a little more time to research. I couldn't find it. I gave up after about an hour. I had other things to do, but I'm still going to kind of find it. But I do know this: our body does lose 8 to 10 cups of water a day through urine, feces, sweat, and talking, right? Because when you talk a lot, you get thirsty, right? So, and everybody knows, when you do this, you can feel the moisture against your hand. So you are losing fluid. So if we're losing 8 to 10 cups of water a day, we need to get it back somehow. And I know there are some people who say, well, I eat lots of plants. I eat lots of fruits and vegetables, and that has a lot of water in it. It does. But are they cooked or are they raw? That's going to change the water content. And if you're not eating a lot of plants and you're eating a lot of, dead food, so to speak, that doesn't really have any fluid in it, then guess what? You're not getting anything in your body. So that's where that whole 8 cups came from. But I admit that when you first wake up in the morning, the urine usually has a little bit of a stronger odor. That first time that you urinate will have a little more color. If during the day, ideally urine is pretty much odorless if you're hydrated well. And obviously it should always be clear. If there's any cloudiness, then there's some infection going on. And you want it to be very, very pale in color. So that's kind of the go-to.
Yeah, the color is helpful. They used to have like this guide on the back of the bathroom doors at the Olympic Training Center of like colors of pee, and so you're peeing and you're like, oh shit, and you look down, it's not that color.
Yeah. Did they have the chart on the healthy poop?
No, I don't even think they knew anything about poop back then. We've learned so much in the last, 12 years yeah, definitely the pee. We have so much more that we research that we want to talk about. So I think we have to have you back on, because we do want to show you had a couple of exercises you had in mind. Maybe they have to do with the trunk or the hips, because we've learned a lot about those, but I would love for you to take it away with just a couple movements that you think could be really
So
applicable to the most
what
people.
I'd like to do is finish with some 3-plane movement so people can kind of get started. And if they do have back pain, this is a great way to get started in 3-plane movement and try to figure out, oh yeah, I don't have any of that. That's what I need to get better at, right? But the biggest thing to remember is when you're exercising your body, when you're training your body, and this goes against everything that an athlete has been told, you want no pain. If there's pain, your brain is saying, they're not smart enough to stop from hurting us, so I'm going to cheat as much as I can to try to get the pain to stop. So what happens is the movement that you want to do, the body parts that you're trying to train, the brain is using different pathways, different muscles the wrong way to try to stop the pain. So you're literally training in dysfunction. So I tell people, if you're feeling pain when you're doing a movement and you're doing it repetitively, you're not doing yourself any favors. You're not going to resolve the problem. You have to get the muscles to work where they're successful and there's no pain. Now, it's different if you just had a surgery and weight bearing is painful. That's a whole nother conversation. I'm just talking about training the body, right? So that said, a nice 3-plane function thing for those of you who may not be watching this on video, if you just stand with your feet, just hip width apart. Now you can do different foot positions if you want, but we'll start off the feet hip width apart, toes pointed forward, and have your hands on your hips. And what you're going to do is you're going to go forward with your hips as your head and shoulders go back, kind of like you're going to do a belly bump with somebody. So hips go forward. And then hips go backward, kind of like, you got your husband standing behind you in the store and he said something you didn't like and you just kind of want to bump him with your hips. So you're going to go forward and you're going to go back. Now, the goal here is if either one of those motions causes pain, you don't do that one. So if there's pain going forward, you just go backward and come back to your starting position. And vice versa. If there's pain going backward, you just go forward. The goal, because that sagittal plane motion, if you can do half of it, the more you do it and it's successful, the more your body restores your ability to do the motion that you can't do initially. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you really want to kind of, like I said, just like you're cozying up. You don't want to punch the bear in the nose and wake him up and have him growl at you. You want to just cozy up and do what you can do successful. So your hips will go forward and back, that's sagittal plane. And when you do sagittal plane motion, if you're doing this right now, even if you're just listening to this, you might be driving, so you can't. But if you're standing, you're going to notice that your ankles are moving. When you go forward, that's dorsiflexion. When you go back, that's plantar flexion. So you're actually mobilizing your ankles by doing this hip matrix, right? So you're getting ankles and hips. And then if you do side to side, kind of like you're standing in between parallel bars and you're trying to tap them with your hips. So this isn't the wave with the arms up, side bending the trunk. This is the hips trying to tap the parallel bars, and your upper body just kind of counterbalances. So when my hips go left, my shoulders go to the right. When my hips go right, my shoulders go to the left. And here you're getting eversion, inversion of your heels in your ankles, which you need for healthy gait. So you're mobilizing those two different parts. And then, of course, we want to do rotation. So you just kind of pretend you got a flashlight in your belly button and you want to wave it across the wall in front of you. And here you're getting pronation, supination in your feet. And you're getting that nice rotation, which we want to switch on to support that bladder. So this is a really good motion to be doing as well, right? So that's a great way to mobilize your hips below your low back. And just kind of get everything started moving. Now, you can do that with your feet in different positions. You can put your right foot forward. And so now if your right foot is forward, just a half a step, when your hips go forward, you're going to feel it more in the front of your left hip, as well as the front of the body. And so if you're somebody who does a lot of sitting, that can help to sort of open up the psoas, the hip flexors, which sort of get locked short, which we didn't really talk much about. but this is a great way to get that going. And if it hurts to bring your hips forward, then just go back and come to neutral. And before you know it, you will get that psoas, that hip flexor, to kind of open up, because you're releasing it by going backward. You're kind of sort of like putting a rubber band on slack. You're helping it to release. So, and then of course you could repeat that with the left foot forward. You can turn your toes out, toes in. You can play with all those different foot positions. That's a great way. Now, I'll finish with this one because I know we want to do trunk, right? Trunk is huge. And so to get that, and your trunk is between your neck and your low back. It's where your thoracic spine is. You've got 12 vertebrae, and it's where all your ribs attach. Okay. So you want that area to be really mobile. Like I said, that's the silent saboteur. So a really good way to mobilize it would be to bend forward and have your arms go up behind you and look down at the floor, and then come up and raise your arms up. And hopefully I'm not messing with my microphone here. Raise your arms up and look up and bend backward. So that's going to really help to mobilize that thoracic spine. And you can do this with one arm. You know, if you've got a shoulder that's not happy, you can do it with one arm. It's best with both. And then you want the side bending. So here's where you put your arms straight up toward the ceiling. And depending on how stiff you make your arms, you're going to feel it more in your trunk or your pelvis. So if you make your arms really stiff and you side bend, so now it's not about the hips going to the parallel bars, it's that side bending. Now, this also helps to strengthen your trunk, your core, right? Your core is actually from your nose to your toes. It's not your abs. Everybody's misinformed about that too, but that's another topic. So we go side to side, and that's going to wake up that thoracic spine in frontal plane. And then rotation. If you put your arms out in front of you, kind of like the old black and white Frankenstein movie, and you keep your hands an equal distance apart, sort of like you're holding a kitchen towel or a cane, so that your arms don't come apart. So they're shoulder height, straight out in front of you, and you're going to rotate as far as you can to the right. And if you've got full rotation, you'll be pointing to the wall directly behind you. And then, of course, you're going to do the other side. And notice if there's a difference. If you can go further to one side than the other, you've got an asymmetry. So that might be why you've got some pain, shoulder or back, because your body's turning better to one side than the other, and your brain may be cheating and not telling you. So
these are assessment techniques as
these
well
are
as
these are great movements.
Okay.
Yeah. The assessment is the test, is the exercise.
Okay.
So yeah, if you're really fit, you can even hold a light weight when you do them, right? Depending on, but you don't want to use a weight if you're not ready for it. Because
well, folks, go to our YouTube channel to see Eileen do these exercises, although she did do a very, very good description if you can't get to YouTube. And tell us, Eileen, where people can see more of these videos and get your book.
Yeah, so I do have my YouTube channel. It's just Eileen Kopsaftis, right, on YouTube. And my book is called Pain Culprits. And I've got a lot of chapters in there about, you know, how a lot of the medications we take can actually create pain as a side effect. You know, there's a lot of things in there about pain, obviously. I've got 4 chapters in there on specific body areas. One's for knee, back, shoulder, and hip. I'm gonna start working on pain culprits too at some point, and I got to get ankle and pelvic floor and other things in there. But that's the book, and that's on Amazon. And my main website is havelifelongwellbeing.com. And any event that I'm hosting is going to be posted on there, and people can contact me and see other things. The free site that I talked about, the membership, that is at mwpprivateclub.com. MWP stands for Move Without Pain. So that's where they can see that 3-plane assessment video. It's only 21 minutes, and they can start learning how to train in 3 planes of motion.
Okay, that's going to be for all that for the show notes, because that was a lot. So you're a busy lady.
Yeah, sorry. Yes.
No, it's good. It's good. I feel very confident that a lot of our listeners are going to be heading to one or more of those places. This was extraordinary, really helpful. I learned so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm so thankful you had me here. Like I said, this is not mainstream knowledge, but it needs to be, right?
Yeah, sure does. Sure
Thank
does.
you.
Hey, folks. Okay, back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switch4good.org. That's podcast@switch4good.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review and zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switch4good.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to Switch for Good. This is the future.